Why was everyone ignoring her at the bar? The air in the MWR tent was thick, sweat, beer, and generator fumes. A plywood cathedral built to forget. Every laugh, every clink of glass, was a fragile attempt to drown out the war waiting just outside the wire. At a corner table sat a woman who didn't quite belong there. Gunnery Sergeant Alina Rostova, uniform crisp, posture straight, movements deliberate. She wasn't trying to hide. She just wasn't trying to be seen. Her hair, silver streaks pulled back tight into a regulation bun, caught the dim yellow light. Her face bore the faint lines of someone who had stared too long at faraway things. Not wrinkles of age, but the quiet etchings of memory. To most, she looked out of place here, too still, too quiet. And that made her an easy target. At the bar, 3 Marines laughed too loud. Sergeant Davies, broad-shouldered, jaw tight, the kind of man who believed noise proved presence. Beside him, Corporal Chun and Lance Corporal Miller, both running on the restless energy that comes after too many patrols and not enough meaning. They saw her rank. They saw the ribbons. But they didn't see her. "Look at that," Davies muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Gunny from S1 probably lost her way from the printer." Chun chuckled. "Maybe she's here to file a complaint about morale." Miller didn't laugh. He just watched her. Something in her stillness made him uneasy. Alina didn't react. Didn't flinch. Didn't look. Her fingers turned the whiskey glass slowly, watching light fracture through the amber. It wasn't a drink, it was a ritual. A quiet motion to keep her mind anchored in a place that never stopped moving. Davies smirked. The lack of reaction only fed him. He pushed off from the bar and swaggered toward her, boots heavy on the wooden floor. Every eye followed. "Evening, Gunny," he said, voice soaked in sarcasm. "Don't see many admin types this far forward. Must be a big paperwork emergency." Alina lifted her eyes. Pale blue. Not cold, just impossibly calm. Like the sky before a storm you don't see coming. "I'm not admin," she said softly. Her voice had a rasp, the kind that came from years of dust, wind, and silence. Davies leaned in, planting his hands on her table. Wood creaked. "Oh, right, logistics then, counting beans and bullets while the rest of us use them." Her eyes didn't waver. "I do my job, Sergeant," she said. "You should do yours." The tent went quiet. No shouting, no escalation. Just a sentence that hit harder than a punch. Davies' face flushed. That kind of calm was worse than anger, because it made you see yourself. Chun moved to stand behind him, ready for backup. Miller hung back, stomach tight, wanting to say something but not knowing what. "My job," Davies said through gritted teeth, "is to make sure every Marine in my platoon can fight, handle pressure, not be dead weight. And when I see someone like you," he gestured at her, "sitting behind a desk for 20 years, it makes me question the standards." At another table, First Sergeant Gutierrez watched quietly. He'd seen Davies before, good Marine, good leader, hot head. And he knew exactly what kind of storm was about to hit. But before he could intervene, the air in the tent turned blood red. The emergency alarm howled through the base. A shrill, piercing wail that ripped the moment apart. It wasn't a drill. Drinks were left half full. Laughter died mid-breath. Every Marine moved in sync, instinct overriding everything else. Tables overturned, boots thundered toward the exits, shouts layered over the klaxon's scream. "Time for the real Marines to go to work," Davies muttered, shooting her a final look before sprinting into the night. Alina didn't move immediately. She finished her whiskey, set the empty glass down perfectly in the center of the table, and only then stood. No rush. No panic. Just precision. Outside, the forward operating base erupted into motion, vehicles revving, radios spitting clipped commands, the air vibrating with urgency. She didn't head for the barracks, didn't grab a rifle. She walked straight toward the one place that mattered when chaos hit, the Tactical Operations Center. The TOC was chaos contained, screens glowing red with heat signatures, officers barking data across radios. A holographic map projected a burning section of the nearby city, a Shadiq quarter, a warren of broken tenements and narrow streets where light and death both disappeared easily. Captain Vale stood at the map, jaw locked, Gutierrez beside him, eyes hard. Pathfinder team is compromised, Vale said, voice sharp. Two-man recon. Staff Sergeant Thorne, Sergeant Diaz, pinned down on the roof of the old textile factory. Diaz is hit non-ambulatory. Thorne's holding, but he's down to his last mags. The words dropped like stones. Everyone in the room knew what it meant. That area was a death trap, too tight for vehicles, too hot for air support. Send a QRF, Gutierrez asked, though his tone said he already knew the answer. Negative, Vale replied. Sniper has the main approach zeroed. Kilo Street's a kill box. We send a squad, we lose a squad, and gunships are off the table. Manpads in play, too close to civilian structures. A trap. A perfect bloody trap. Davies' squad, his earlier arrogance stripped by the red light and adrenaline, stood ready near the entrance. Sir, he said, give us a route, we'll get to them. Vale looked up, pity flickering behind his fatigue. And how do you plan to get past a sniper who's got every approach locked, Sergeant? Before Davies could answer, another voice, quiet but cutting, filled the space. You're looking at the wrong building. Every head turned. Elena Rostova hadn't moved from the back wall, but somehow her presence shifted the air. Vale frowned, and you are. Gunnery Sergeant Rostova, she said evenly, stepping closer to the holographic map. You placed the sniper in the ill-hated mosque. That's wrong. The intel tech scoffed. Ma'am, we've got thermal confirmation. Muzzle flashes from that position. You picked up his decoy, she said. Flat. Certain. She pointed at a narrow alley between the factory and a forgotten municipal records building. He's west 3rd floor, old records office, over 900 meters shooting through a vent gap, complex crosswind from the river, harder shot, but only one that gives him line of sight to that rooftop. Her words weren't guesses, they were geometry. How do you know that? Gutierrez asked, voice low. Sound, she said simply. The decoy's echo would reach first, half a second before the real round. That's why it sounds like it's coming from the east. The intel officer typed furiously. His eyes widened. She's right, trajectory and wound match. Entry angle, it's perfect. The room fell silent. Vale studied her, then looked back at the screen. You've identified the problem, Gunny. How do you solve it? You don't send a platoon, she replied. Too much noise, too many targets. He'll pick them off before they're halfway. You need a ghost, 1 or 2 people, moving through the dead zones he can't see. Vale's voice sharpened. And who do you suggest we send on this ghost hunt? Elena finally looked up. I'll need a spotter and 3 men for security. We move now. Her tone wasn't a suggestion. It was a verdict. Davies swallowed hard. The same woman he'd mocked 10 minutes ago now spoke, with a gravity that froze the room. My team's ready, he said quietly. We'll go. Vale hesitated, but only for a breath. Gutierrez, give her what she needs. Then to Elena, you're in charge, bring my men back. She gave a single sharp nod. Then turned to Davies, Chun, and Miller. Armory, 5 minutes. Drop the heavy plates. We're moving fast and quiet. If you make noise, you're a liability. No one argued. No one even breathed. She walked out, and for the first time, Davies realized something terrifying. The calm wasn't arrogance. It was experience. 5 minutes later, In the armory's cold, fluorescent light, her hands moved with surgical grace, assembling a weapon none of them had ever seen before. A precision rifle, carbon barrel, custom optics, the kind of weapon you don't get issued. You earn it. Miller watched in silence, unable to look away. She didn't just handle it. She communed with it. Suppressors on everything, she said without looking up. Standard ammo's useless. Subsonic rounds for entry, match grade for the primary. Each word landed with the authority of someone who had done this far too many times. Davies nodded once. Yes, Gunny. They followed her into the moonless night. 4 shadows leaving behind the noise, slipping into the black veins of the city, a world where every sound could be death. And as they vanished beyond the wire, Miller's last thought before the desert swallowed them whole was a simple one. Who the hell is she? But there was something she hadn't told them. Not yet. What kind of person moves like she's already been here before? The night wrapped around them like a shroud, silent, airless, and unnervingly still. Out beyond the wire, sound didn't travel the same. It was swallowed whole by the dust, the crumbling walls, and the endless hum of a sleeping war. Rostova led them, unhurried, steady, deliberate. Every step was a calculation, every glance a small, silent verdict on the landscape. The others followed, still half in disbelief. A few hours ago, she'd been the quiet woman at the bar. Now she was their compass through hell. They didn't take the main road. She cut through a drainage ditch that ran parallel to the perimeter, slipping through a section of fence she'd already known would be weak. Wire cutters whispered, metal gave way. Davies looked at her, wanted to ask how she knew that section was unalarmed, unwatched, but didn't. Something in her eyes warned against it. The city swallowed them whole. The Ashadiq Quarter wasn't a place people entered willingly. Buildings leaned into each other like drunks holding each other up. Every corner smelled of smoke, old dust, and rot. Rostova's movements were impossible, not fast, not slow, but inevitable. Her boots barely made a sound. When she stopped, they stopped. When she looked, they froze. Even the air seemed to wait for her permission to move. Gunny, Chun whispered, how do you know where you're going? Because I've been lost here before, she replied quietly, eyes forward. And that was all she said. They descended into a storm drain. The stench hit them first, rot, oil, stagnant water. The tunnel was a grave for echoes. Every drip of water became a heartbeat. Rostova crouched low, flashlight off, navigating by the faint green glow of her wrist-mounted GPS. Her voice was barely audible over the sound of their breathing. Single file, keep your muzzle forward, don't talk. Miller's pulse was pounding. He could feel sweat trickling down his spine, feel the walls closing in. But somehow, her presence made it bearable. Her calm wasn't just discipline, it was faith. For nearly a kilometer, they crept through the veins of the city. When they finally emerged, the night had turned colder, heavier, like even the stars didn't want to watch what was coming. They surfaced into the courtyard of what once might have been a school. Windows shattered, chalkboards splintered, bullet holes pocked across faded murals of children who'd never grown up. Rostova raised a fist, the team froze. Her voice came through the calm, clinical. 2 men, 20 meters northeast. Davies peered through his NVGs. Nothing. Negative, Gunny, I don't see. 2 soft thumps interrupted him. Her suppressed pistol coughed twice, quiet, surgical. Davies turned his head just in time to see 2 dark silhouettes slump in a doorway he hadn't even noticed. Perfect shots, both head, moving targets in darkness. Chun exhaled a shaky breath. Jesus Christ. Rostova didn't look back. Keep up. They climbed the ruins, one broken stairwell at a time, until they reached the roof. The city unfolded below them, a quilt of orange sodium light and long, shifting shadows. She unslung her rifle. The sound of metal on fabric was softer than a whisper. She laid down, elbows set, cheek resting on the stock like an old friend. "Miller," she said, "spotter scope. Third floor, records building, fourth window from the left." He sat up beside her, hands trembling slightly. "Got it." "Don't look at the window," she murmured. "Look through it, look at the air." "The air." "Find the shimmer, the ghost in the dark, that's his breath, that's his barrel." He adjusted focus, eyes blurring, and then there. A ripple, barely perceptible. Like heat bending the air where no heat should be. "I see it," he whispered. "God, I see it." "Good." Her tone didn't change, didn't praise. It was just acknowledgement, confirmation of shared truth. Davies, Chun, rooftop security. Anything that isn't us, shoot it. The two Marines moved without question now. Arrogance was gone, replaced by reverence. This wasn't a woman. This was a weapon-wearing skin. Rostova's world narrowed. She checked wind with a small handheld meter, air pressure, humidity, crosswind. She whispered the numbers to herself like a prayer. 15 kilometers per hour, gusting 20, crosswind 280. "He's shooting through a vent," she murmured. "Small hole, smart, reduces flash." Miller could barely breathe. Watching her was like watching someone build an equation with bullets. "Thorne," she whispered into her mic, patching into the pinned team's frequency. "This is an unknown element. Do not expose yourself. We're engaging the threat." Static, then a strained voice. "Who is this? We're taking fire." "Stay down," she said, low, calm, final. She adjusted her scope one last time. Her breathing slowed. Her pulse disappeared into silence. Time fractured. Every second stretched like glass. Wind, distance, pressure, angle. All dancing in her mind, aligning in one fragile equation. "Inhale." Her voice dropped to a whisper only she could hear. "Exhale." The rifle didn't roar. It sighed. A single muffled cough that vanished into the wind. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then through the scope, the ripple vanished. The window bloomed with spiderweb cracks. A faint shimmer of falling dust. "Threat down," Thorne's voice broke through the calm, disbelief trembling in it. "Sniper, down, Jesus Christ, who are you people?" Rostova was already disassembling her rifle, motion fluid, practiced. "Pathfinder 1," she said softly. "This is Archangel, prepare for extraction." The words hung in the air like a promise. Davies exhaled hard, like someone had released the pressure valve inside his chest. "Gunny, how in the hell?" She stood, slinging her rifle over her shoulder. "The math was good," she said simply. "Now we move." Her calm was unnerving. No adrenaline, no celebration. Just the next step. But the silence didn't last long. Gunfire erupted in the distance, loud, chaotic, growing closer. Neutralizing, the sniper had kicked the hornet's nest. "Contact incoming," Chun called, eyes on the alley. Multiple tangos closing fast. Rostova's tone didn't rise, didn't crack. "Then we leave before they arrive." They moved through the shattered school, weaving between rubble and moonlight. The city was waking up, angry. Gunfire echoed from every direction, 100 metallic voices shouting death into the night. "Davies," Rostova said, "smoke left. Chun, suppress the right window." Her words were commands, not suggestions. Davies fired a grenade, plume of thick smoke flooding the alley. Chun laid down bursts from her M27, brass raining onto the ground like gold. "Move." They sprinted, low and fast, cutting through the maze of burned-out cars and collapsed walls. Each corner brought new fire, each shadow new danger. But Rostova never hesitated. She saw the city differently, not as buildings and streets, but as vectors and angles. Every threat already accounted for before it appeared. Left side clear. Two more behind the van, she called, firing two precise bursts before the shapes even emerged. Davies stopped questioning how she knew. He just followed. For the first time in his career, he wasn't leading, he was learning. When they finally reached the factory where Thorne and Diaz were trapped, the scene was chaos. Tracer round stitched the air. Concrete shattered in bursts of white dust. Davies raised his rifle to return fire, but Rostova stopped him with a hand to his chest. "Waste of ammo," she said quietly. She unclipped a small canister from her vest, a thermobaric grenade. The kind of weapon that didn't just explode, it erased. "Cover your eyes." She pulled the pin, let the spoon fly and threw. A soft thump. Then the air itself imploded. The explosion didn't sound like thunder. It sounded like the sky gasping. The machine gun fire stopped instantly. Thorne appeared at the roof edge, dragging Diaz. Rostova moved to meet them, every motion efficient, decisive. Thorne stared at her, panting. "Who the hell are you, Gunny?" "Just a ride home," she said, eyes scanning the street. "Can he walk?" "Negative." "Then we carry him." No speeches, no dramatics. Just work. They lifted Diaz between them, Davies on one side, Rostova on the other. Chun and Miller provided cover, moving like extensions of her will. They advanced block by block, leapfrogging through alleys and rooftops, bullets slicing air around them. Each move was perfect, not lucky, not chaotic. Perfect. Rostova saw what no one else could. A rooftop shadow, a sniper prepping a shot. Her rifle barked once, he dropped. Miller looked at her, eyes wide. "You just saved my life." She didn't answer. Didn't need to. By the time they reached the extraction point, a collapsed overpass on the city's edge, they were out of ammunition and nearly out of strength. The faint rumble of engines filled the air. A V-22 Osprey broke over the horizon, rotors churning dust into a storm. The ramp dropped. Vale's voice came over comms, Archangel status. Rostova keyed her mic. "Package secure, all personnel accounted for, we're coming home." Inside the aircraft, the team sat in silence, adrenaline draining, hearts still hammering. Davies stared across the hold at Rostova. She sat motionless, her rifle resting beside her, eyes closed as if in prayer. And for the first time, he understood. She wasn't fearless. She was empty. The kind of empty that only comes after you've given everything you have to something that never ends. He looked away, ashamed of every word he'd said to her at that bar. And as the Osprey lifted them out of the darkness, the first streaks of dawn broke over the desert, soft, pale light spilling across faces that would never forget what they'd seen. She'd given them a second chance. And not one of them yet knew who she really was. But they would. Soon. What happens when the truth walks into the room and refuses to speak? The debriefing room was cold, too clean, too bright. A place built for facts, not ghosts. The hum of the air filtration system filled the silence. Monitors glowed with paused footage, helmet cam feeds, drone overlays, comm transcripts. The war reduced to data. Captain Vale stood at one end of the steel table, arms folded. Beside him, First Sergeant Gutierrez, unreadable, the creases in his face deeper than the desert lines outside. Across from them, 4 Marines stood at parade rest. Rostova, Davies, Chun, Miller. Behind them, Staff Sergeant Thorne and the wounded Sergeant Diaz, both silent observers, still bandaged, still processing what had happened. The screen replayed a moment in frozen motion, the impossible shot from 900 meters, a muzzle flash no one heard, a sniper erased. Then another clip, the school courtyard, the thermobaric detonation, the fighting withdrawal. The room was silent, but for the faint electric crackle of paused video. Vale finally hit stop. The image disappeared. He looked at Rostova, at the quiet woman standing perfectly still, her uniform immaculate despite the dust and blood still drying on the others. "Gunnery Sergeant," he said evenly, "your report was concise, but it fails to explain several things." He took a slow step forward. "How you knew the sniper's exact position, how you charted a route through unlisted tunnels, how you dismantled a prepared ambush with 4 people." His tone wasn't anger, it was disbelief struggling to stay professional. Rostova didn't flinch. "Experience, sir," she said quietly, "and a decent understanding of geometry. No arrogance, no smirk. Just fact." Gutierrez shifted his weight, eyes flicking toward Thorne. "Staff Sergeant," he said, "you've been recon for over a decade. You've seen your share of fire. What did you see out there?" Thorne didn't answer right away. He looked at Rostova, then at the others. The weight in his eyes wasn't fear, it was recognition. When he spoke, his voice was low, thick, like he was speaking into a confession booth. "Sir, for 10 years I've heard stories." He paused, searching for words. "Stories from Fallujah, Ramadi, Kandahar, about a ghost, someone who worked alone or with a handful of Marines, someone who could walk into a city crawling with insurgents and never leave a footprint. Snipers that hunted her never lived long enough to confirm she was real." Chun glanced sideways at Davies, who stood rigid, jaw tight. Thorne continued. "The enemy had a name for her, Al-Harth the Plowman, because wherever she went she carved through them, not just killing, dismantling, turning their fear against them." He looked back at Rostova. "We had our own name, a call sign. I thought it was just a story, something old-timers told to keep young officers humble." He drew a slow, shaky breath. "But I saw her work, there's no mistaking it." He turned to Vale. "What I saw that night was the work of Harrow." The name landed like a detonation. The silence that followed wasn't quiet, it was stunned. Like the air itself had been punched out of the room. Chun's breath caught. Miller's eyes widened, disbelief warring with dread. Davies, the loud, confident sergeant from the bar, felt his knees weaken. The word echoed in his head. Harrow. He'd heard it whispered in training. In the stories passed between deployments, in the myths told to fill long nights. Harrow, the ghost sniper, the architect of impossible rescues. The Marine who disappeared from official rosters, but never from the field. And he'd mocked her. Gutierrez's eyes closed briefly. He remembered reports, redacted names, classified missions, operations that didn't make sense until now. He opened them again and met Rostova's gaze. It was like staring into a mirror you didn't want to look into. Vale swallowed hard. "You're telling me," he began slowly, "that the same Harrow, the one from Task Force Damascus, is standing in my TOC." Thorne didn't answer. He didn't need to. Every man in that room already knew. Rostova didn't confirm it, didn't deny it. She just turned her head slightly toward Thorne. "Glad you made it out, Staff Sergeant," she said quietly. That was all. No acknowledgement of legend, no correction. Just that one simple sentence, and in it everything they needed to know. Vale exhaled, rubbing his temples. "Dismissed," he said finally, voice subdued. The word carried relief and regret in equal measure. The team saluted, turned, and left. The heavy door closed behind them with a metallic thud that seemed to echo far too long. Inside the hallway, the air was different, heavier, more human. Davies didn't speak. Couldn't. He walked like a man dragging chains. The memory of his words in the bar replayed in his head on a loop, each one sharper, crueler in retrospect. "Admin staff. Paperwork emergency. Standards. He had measured her by noise, not by silence. And now he understood the cost of that blindness. Chun broke the silence first, voice small. Was that really her? Davies nodded once, jaw clenched. Yeah. Then softer, and we mocked her. Miller didn't speak at all. He just kept walking, eyes forward, jaw trembling slightly. No one laughed. No one said hoorah. They just carried the weight of revelation in silence. 2 nights later, the MWR tent looked different. The air was subdued, laughter forced, movements cautious. The story of the Pathfinder rescue had spread through the base like wildfire, twisted, and retold 100 ways. The official line said a quick reaction force had pulled off the impossible. But everyone knew better. They knew something else, someone else had done it. Rostova walked in quietly, just like before. Same uniform, same whiskey glass. But this time, the room didn't mock her. It stilled. Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned. Even the music from the small radio behind the bar seemed to fade. She didn't notice, or pretended not to. Ordered her single whiskey, walked toward her corner table. Davy stood. The movement startled Chun and Miller, who watched him with uneasy eyes. He wasn't wearing arrogance anymore. He looked like a man walking toward confession. In his hand, a bottle, not cheap whiskey from the supply room, but an aged single malt, the kind you had to trade favors for. He'd been saving it. Not for a celebration. For this. He stepped in front of her. Didn't speak. Didn't know how. He just placed the bottle on her table, gently, respectfully, then looked at her. For a long second, nothing happened. Then quietly he nodded. Not the nod of a peer. The nod of a student to a teacher. A soldier to something greater. A silent apology. Rostova's gaze didn't soften, but her eyes flicked down to the bottle, then back to him. A small, nearly imperceptible nod. Acknowledgement, acceptance. Forgiveness without words. Davies turned and walked back to his table. Chun and Miller watched him sit, his hands trembling slightly as he picked up his glass. No one spoke for the rest of the night. Across the room, Rostova poured herself a single measure of the new whiskey. The liquid caught the lamplight, gold over glass, and she raised it slightly in Davies' direction before taking a slow sip. The room exhaled. No cheers, no applause. Just quiet respect. Outside, the desert wind moved through the wires and antenna masts like a whispering choir. At the far edge of the base, the horizon was beginning to lighten, that faint, bruised purple that precedes dawn. And while the rest of the base slept or tried to, Rostova sat alone again, the same as before, but not the same at all. Because tonight, silence wasn't loneliness. It was peace. A fragile kind earned, not granted. In the distance, engines hummed, patrols rotated, and the war continued indifferent to legend, to redemption, to the fragile pride of men. She sat there quietly, hands folded around the glass, watching the reflection of light tremble in the liquid. The mission was over, but the reckoning had only just begun. And in that stillness, in that heavy, wordless night, every Marine who'd been there understood something they never would have learned in a classroom, or a firefight, or a lifetime of drills. Sometimes greatness doesn't speak. It just walks in, does the work, and leaves. And the rest of us spend years trying to live up to it. What do legends do when no one's watching? The night had faded into something softer, not daylight yet, but that bruised purple just before dawn. The kind of quiet that made even the wind hesitate. At the far edge of the forward operating base, beyond the rows of HESCO barriers and stacked ammo crates, Gunnery Sergeant Elena Rostova sat alone. An empty ammo can served as her seat. In front of her, a neatly laid-out mat. On it, the disassembled pieces of her rifle, bolt, firing pin, trigger assembly. Each one cleaned with the precision of ritual. She worked slowly, deliberately. Every stroke of the cloth, every click of metal against metal, sounded like part of a prayer. In the movies, heroes ride away when the smoke clears. But in real life, they sit down, clean the dirt from their tools, and make themselves whole again. The air smelled of solvent and steel, sharp, honest smells that didn't lie. Her hands moved with a kind of reverence. It wasn't just a rifle. It was a memory made of metal. The world had shrunk to the rhythm of her cleaning rod. Push-pull. Wipe-inspect. Repeat. Each motion erased something unseen, not carbon, not dust, but a fraction of everything she carried. The legends, the whispers, the looks in the bar, none of it existed here. This was her world. This was her peace. A soft crunch of gravel behind her broke the silence. She didn't turn. "You can come closer, Lance Corporal," she said quietly. Miller froze mid-step, startled that she'd known it was him. He approached slowly, boots scuffing lightly against the dirt. In his hands, 2 steaming mugs of coffee. He began awkwardly, "brought you this." She looked up, accepted the mug without hesitation. The steam rose between them, carrying the scent of burnt beans and dust. She took a sip, black, bitter, perfect. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded, unsure what to do next. For a long moment, he just stood there, watching her hands. The way she handled the rifle, delicate, almost tender. The kind of touch you give to something that saved your life. He cleared his throat. "Gunny, can I ask you something?" She didn't look up. "You can ask." "In the TOC and on the roof, how did you know?" He hesitated, struggling for the words. "How did you see all that? The sound, the decoy, the wind. You acted like you already knew how it would end." Rostova set the bolt assembly down, the light catching its oiled surface. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that Miller thought maybe she wasn't going to answer. Then she spoke. "When most people look at a problem," she said slowly, "they focus on the threat, the sniper in the window, the machine gun in the building, the thing that scares them." She paused, eyes fixed on the rifle parts before her. They stare at it so hard, it's all they can see. She picked up the firing pin, holding it between 2 fingers. "That's a mistake." Her voice was low, measured. "You don't learn anything from staring at the target. The target's just the end of the equation." She gestured toward the dark horizon. "You have to look at everything else, the space around it, the shadows, the way dust moves in the air, the way sound bends off a wall and disappears in another direction. You listen to the silence between gunshots." Her eyes flicked toward him. "That's where the truth hides." Miller swallowed hard, nodding slightly though he wasn't sure he understood. He wanted to badly. Rostova placed the firing pin back on the mat, then picked up the bolt carrier group. "The enemy tells you everything you need to know," she continued. "Not with what he does, but with what he tries to hide." Her thumb traced the groove of the steel. "He hides in the noise. You find him in the quiet." She looked up at Miller again. Her pale eyes reflected the first line of sunlight on the horizon. "The rest," she said, "is just math." Miller didn't move. Didn't speak. The words weren't just about war, he could feel that. They were about life, about perception, about seeing the world for what it really was, not what you feared it to be. He looked at her differently now. Not as Harrow, not as the ghost sniper of whispered myth, but as a teacher, a survivor, a person who had seen too much and somehow learned to live with it. The wind picked up slightly, stirring the sand around them. Rostova continued to reassemble the rifle, each part fitting back into place with a soft, satisfying click. Miller spoke quietly. "Were you always like this? I mean, the calm, the way you see things." She smiled faintly, just one corner of her mouth. "No one's born calm," she said. "I learned to stop reacting to what's loud. Loud things die first." He let that sink in. It wasn't arrogance. It was survival philosophy shaped by decades of observation and loss. Rostova checked the chamber, racked the bolt, and let the weapon rest across her lap. "The rifle's honest," she said. "It doesn't lie. You either did the math right or you didn't." Miller nodded, "But you still call it the work, not the job." She looked at him for a long moment. "It stopped being a job a long time ago." The silence that followed was deep. The kind that holds weight. Then softly, like a confession, she added, "When you do this long enough, you stop chasing glory. You stop caring about medals, stories, the noise people make when they try to name you." She looked down at her hands. "You just want to bring them home, that's all." Miller watched her, and something in his chest shifted. It wasn't admiration anymore. It was understanding. He finally realized that behind every story of heroism was a person quietly trying to live with what it cost. She set the rifle down beside her, perfectly clean, perfectly whole. Then she said something he'd never forget. "Everyone wants to be the one who takes the shot," she said softly. "No one thinks about what comes after." She looked out toward the desert, where the first sunlight began to spill over the dunes. "The silence after the shot is louder than anything you'll ever hear." Miller didn't know what to say. So he didn't. He just stood there, coffee mug in hand, watching her finish her ritual, the sun painting her uniform in pale gold. The rifle was complete now. Every part back in place, every detail perfect. Rostova picked it up, checked the optics, and let it rest across her knees. Miller finally spoke. "Gunny, I think I get it now. Why everyone calls you Hero." She gave a faint, almost wistful smile. "They can call me whatever helps them sleep." He frowned slightly. "You do like it, the name." She looked back toward the sunrise. "Harrow means to break the ground," she said. "To turn the soil, to tear it open so something new can grow." Her voice softened. "I think that's what they never understood. It wasn't about killing. It was about clearing the field." Miller stood silently beside her, staring at the light slowly crawling across the desert floor. The wind was warm now, the world waking up. He felt something stir inside him, respect, yes, but also gratitude. She'd shown him more in 10 minutes than 1,000 drills ever had. She didn't just see war. She read it, like a language no one else could speak. After a long pause, Miller nodded once. Then he set his own coffee down on the ammo can beside her. "Keep it," he said quietly. "You'll need it more than me." He turned to leave. Rostova watched him go, young, uncertain, but walking a little straighter now. She picked up the second mug. It was still hot. She took a slow sip, eyes on the horizon, as the sun finally broke free from the earth, a bright line of fire stretching across the desert. For a long while she didn't move, didn't speak. The weapon was clean. The night was over. The war, at least for now, was quiet. She closed her eyes and breathed in the heat of the new day. Somewhere behind her the base began to stir, engines revving, voices calling, another cycle beginning. But she stayed still. Let the light wash over her. Let the silence fill her lungs. Because out here there were no medals. No legends. Just the simple, brutal truth of work well done. And in that moment beneath the rising sun, one thought settled in her mind, quiet, certain, final. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. What changes after you meet someone the world calls a ghost? Morning came like it always did, blunt, ordinary, indifferent. The bass woke with its usual rhythm. Boots scuffing gravel, the metallic clang of mess hall trays, the thrum of distant rotors. But beneath the routine hum, something had shifted. People moved quieter now. Laughter didn't echo as loudly in the MWR tent. And when Gunnery Sergeant Rostova walked across the yard, conversations didn't stop out of fear. They stopped out of reverence. No one called her Gunny from S1 anymore. They didn't call her anything. They just stepped aside. The legend had a name again, and she wore it like a scar. Lance Corporal Miller noticed it first, the silence that followed her everywhere. He used to think quiet meant absence. Now he knew it meant gravity. He watched her from a distance as she crossed the yard toward the range, rifle case in hand, movements exact and effortless. He wondered how many wars she carried in her bones. That night on the roof still replayed in his head, the way she'd moved, the way she'd seen things no one else could. He'd told himself he'd never forget that sound, the single suppressed breath of a rifle shot that had changed everything. He hadn't. Sometimes in dreams he still heard it. A whisper in the dark that said, "See better." He found her later at the makeshift shooting line, adjusting the sight on her rifle. The desert stretched out before them, endless and pale. Targets set in uneven rows shimmered in the heat. "Permission to join you, Gunny?" he asked. She looked up. "Bring your rifle, Miller." He did. They shot in silence for a while. Her shots were poetry, clean, measured, unhurried. His were trying. After a few magazines, she finally spoke. "You're jerking on the exhale," she said quietly. "You're trying to control the moment. You don't, you guide it." He nodded, made the correction, fired again. The round found center. "Better," she said. They continued for an hour, the sound of gunfire echoing like punctuation in the morning air. When they paused, Miller finally asked, "You ever get used to it?" "To what?" "The noise, the missions, the aftermath." Rostova didn't answer right away. She ejected her mag, checked the chamber, then looked out at the horizon. "You don't get used to it," she said. "You just stop pretending it surprises you." She set her rifle down and added, "You'll understand someday. The hardest part isn't the fight, it's the stillness after." Her eyes lingered on the targets far beyond their line, as if she was looking through them, past them, into something only she could see. Later that day, orders came down. A patrol had gone dark near Sector 9, an industrial zone north of the base. IEDs, small arms ambushes, nothing unusual except this time there. Been no contact since the first distress ping. 2 vehicles, 6 Marines missing. The air changed again. Captain Vale assembled a small recovery unit, fast, surgical. Rostova was assigned as overwatch. Miller was on comms and secondary spotting. When he heard her name, he felt the familiar churn of adrenaline and something heavier, the awareness that whatever calm he'd found at sunrise was already slipping away. They rolled out at dusk. The city beyond the wire glowed faintly under the half-moon, the air thick with smoke and that constant undertone of waiting violence. Miller sat across from Rostova in the back of the MRAP. She was checking her equipment, methodical, precise, as if every motion reset the universe's balance. He wanted to say something, but she wasn't in the mood for conversation. Her focus was total. Eyes sharp, face unreadable. Davy sat beside them, silent as well. Since the rescue, he'd changed too. His loud confidence had turned into quiet precision. When he looked at Rostova now, it wasn't disbelief, it was devotion. The vehicle slowed. 2 clicks from the signal's last ping, Vale's voice came over the comms. "Rostova, you're our eyes, find me something." She nodded once, clipped her rifle to her harness and stepped out. The team fanned out across the ruined street, collapsed walls, half-buried cars, graffiti scorched into the concrete. The silence was heavy. Miller set up the spotting scope beside her. She went prone on a pile of rubble, sweeping her scope across the landscape. He followed her rhythm, slow, deliberate, controlled. Minutes passed, nothing moved. Then she spoke, voice low. "Stop scanning where you think the threat is. Look where it is." He frowned. "Ma'am, the enemy hides in your assumptions," she said. "Look at what doesn't fit." He adjusted focus, looked again, and saw it faint movement, a shimmer in the air where the heat didn't match the rest. A reflection. A mirror. "Glass," he whispered. "Side window, third floor, southeast building." Rostova's tone didn't change. "Good, but it's not a shooter. It's bait. Look lower." He lowered the lens. The street below the window had been freshly swept. No debris, no trash. "Too clean." Her voice was almost proud. "Tripwires, dual-linked, pressure triggers, you found their funnel." Miller exhaled. "Jesus." Rostova adjusted her rifle, sighting higher. "Not Jesus, geometry." She called over comms. "Command, this is Archangel. We've got IED indicators, Sector 9, building grid Echo 2-4. Possible overwatch with decoy optics. Recommend alternate ingress from West Alley." "Copy," Vale replied. "You're still our overwatch. Hold position." "Affirmative." The team rerouted, ghosts in the dark, moving along the shadowed alleyways. Miller watched them go, heart pounding. He whispered, "How do you always see it before anyone else?" Rostova didn't look up from her scope. "I don't see it first," she said softly. "I see the silence where it should be loud." Minutes turned into an hour. The radio crackled with occasional updates, nothing significant. Then suddenly static. "Contact, contact front." Automatic fire roared over the channel. Shouts, explosions, chaos. Rostova's voice snapped to life. "Eyes up, Miller, find them." He swung the scope toward the sound, scanning through the smoke. "There flashes, movement." "They're pinned down behind the vehicles," he shouted. Rostova's tone dropped to that calm, deadly focus Miller knew too well. "Two shooters, high left balcony, one RPG in play, range 810. She exhaled, adjusted, fired once. The first shooter dropped. Fired again. The second gone. She watched the scope, unmoving. Third one's waiting, different angle. "How can you?" "Wait for it," she said. The faint metallic glint appeared in the distance, an RPG tube rising from behind a wall. Before it cleared the edge, she fired. The round detonated mid-launch, fire blossoming into the night sky. "Threats neutralized," she said calmly into the comm. "Continue movement." Vale's voice crackled back, half shock, half relief. "Archangel, you just saved 6 lives." Rostova's reply was simple. "Then that's 6 fewer ghosts to carry." The rest of the recovery was routine as anything could be here. The missing patrol was found alive, shaken but breathing. Rostova covered their extraction with the same eerie stillness that had become her signature. When they returned to base, it was past midnight. Miller followed her to the edge of the compound, where she sat down on a crate, same as before, same quiet posture. He wanted to thank her. Instead, he asked something else. "How do you live with it, Gunny, the ghosts?" She looked at him for a long time. The desert wind lifted the edge of her collar. When she spoke, it was almost a whisper. "You don't live with them," she said. "You live for them." She looked out at the horizon, at the faint flicker of lightning far beyond the dunes. "They're the reason you do miss, the reason you keep your rifle clean, the reason you walk back into the fire even when you've had enough." Miller nodded slowly, throat tight. Rostova smiled faintly, not warmth but recognition. "Every Marine carries ghosts," she said. The difference is whether you let them haunt you or guide you. He looked down at the rifle across her knees, perfectly maintained, silent, waiting. "Which do yours do?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze was distant, lost somewhere far beyond the base lights. "Both," she said finally, "depends on the day." The wind shifted again, carrying the faint scent of rain. The desert rarely gave water, but tonight it threatened it. Miller stood beside her in silence. There were no more questions to ask, only things to remember. The base PA crackled faintly, calling for morning briefing rotations. Another mission, another day, another war. Rostova rose, slung her rifle and looked back at him. "Get some rest, Lance Corporal." "Yes, Gunny." She turned, walking toward the barracks, boots barely crunching on the gravel. For a moment the lights caught her silhouette, a soldier carved from shadow and purpose. Then she disappeared into the dawn haze. Miller stood there long after she was gone. The air was cooling, the sky turning pale. He finally whispered, mostly to himself, "She doesn't fight for medals, she fights for silence." And for the first time since he'd arrived in country, he understood what that meant. How do you choose when every option feels like losing? 3 nights after the Sector 9 recovery, the base was running on nerves. Sleep was rare, laughter rarer. The kind of tension that came when you knew the next crisis wasn't a question, just a matter of time. At the Tactical Operations Center, the lights burned through the night. Screens flickered with heat signatures, calm traffic and endless noise. Rostova stood quietly near the back, arms folded, listening. Her eyes weren't on the screens, they were on the faces of the men in the room. Captain Vale was mid-brief, voice clipped. Local intel reports an insurgent splinter group holding 3 civilian engineers hostage, NGO contractors. They're being used as leverage for ransom and propaganda. Coordinates put them in the Al-Fari district, industrial block. He pointed to the map, a mess of narrow alleys and collapsed warehouses. A dead zone for drones. The perfect place to disappear. "Negotiations?" Gutierrez asked. "Non-existent," Vale said. "They've already executed 1 hostage on camera." His tone hardened. "We get them out before sunrise, or we start recovering bodies." He looked at Rostova. "You're leading Overwatch again, Gunny, same team as before." Her answer was simple. "Understood." Outside, the night had the heavy stillness that comes before violence. The air carried the faint tang of oil and rain-soaked dust. Davies, Chun, and Miller geared up beside her. No one talked much anymore. The joking had died weeks ago, replaced by quiet focus. Miller checked his rifle twice, then looked at Rostova, who was tightening the sling on hers. He noticed it again, her calm. Not forced, not trained. Natural, like the storm couldn't reach her. "Gunny," he said, voice low, "what if they use the hostages as shields?" She met his gaze. "Then you find the pattern in the chaos," she said, "and you wait for the one moment the noise breaks." He nodded, though he didn't understand yet. The insertion point was 2 blocks east of the target zone, a crumbling factory complex that reeked of rust and gun oil. Rostova led from the front, as always. The team moved like shadows, a whisper through the bones of the dead city. Miller's breathing stayed measured, just like she'd taught him. Listen to the silence. Find what doesn't fit. They reached Overwatch. Rostova deployed her rifle, eyes scanning the target building, a warehouse-turned fortress. Through the scope she saw the hostages first, 2 men kneeling, hands bound, blindfolded. The third already gone. Lifeless, propped up as a warning. Miller flinched. "Jesus." Rostova's tone was cold, professional. 3 tangos inside, 2 on the catwalk, 1 on the ground level near the hostages. "Positions," Davies whispered. She pointed without looking. Windows here, here, and here. Roof's clear, but I don't trust it. Her eyes narrowed behind the scope. Something was wrong. The men guarding the hostages moved wrong. Too disciplined. Not panicked, not eager, controlled. This isn't ransom, she murmured. It's bait. Vale's voice came through the comm. Confirm. She adjusted focus. The lighting was wrong, floodlamps deliberately angled toward the entry point. They're waiting for us. Abort. She hesitated. No, she said finally, we adapt. She turned to her team. We move west flank, no direct entry. We breach from the blind zone behind the generator stack, slow and quiet. Davies nodded. He didn't question her anymore. Not after what he'd seen. They circled the compound, sticking to shadows and debris. Rain began to fall, thin, cold, muffled. The kind of rain that swallowed sound. Rostova raised a fist. Hold. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Miller, you're on scope. What do you see near the left wall? He peered through the monocular, scanning. Nothing but trash and rebar. She was silent. Then look lower. He adjusted. The puddle near the wall rippled faint, rhythmic. Not from rain. Heartbeat sensor, he muttered. She nodded once. Trip sensor on vibration. Anyone crosses that line, they'll know. How do we? Before he could finish, she was already moving. Crouching low, she slid through a broken drainage channel beneath the fence, emerging on the other side. A ghost in the wet dark. Miller followed, heart hammering, every instinct screaming to stay still. But she made it look so easy. They moved along the wall until they reached a rusted maintenance door. Rostova examined the hinges, the frame, the lock. Then whispered, Chun, charge minimal yield. Chun nodded, planted a small breaching puck and backed away. A muffled pop. The lock gave. They slipped inside. The air inside the warehouse was colder. The metallic tang of blood mixed with the damp of oil. Somewhere above, footsteps creaked on metal. Rostova raised 2 fingers, halt. Then pointed upward. 3 hostiles catwalk. Another near the hostages. Davies mouthed orders. She looked at him. On my mark. Through her scope, she could see the nearest insurgent's breath fog in the air. He leaned lazily against a railing, rifle slung loose. She took a slow inhale. Her finger brushed the trigger. Then stopped. Something in the background caught her eye, movement behind a partition. A child. A boy, no older than 12, barefoot, clutching something, a small handheld radio. The detonator. Her voice came through the comm, soft but sharp. Abort, no shots. There's a child with a trigger. Davies froze mid-aim. Chun's finger hovered over her safety. Command, this is Archangel, Rostova whispered. We have an unaccounted minor in the AO, possible dead man switch. Request instruction. Vale's voice crackled through static. Gunny, are you certain? Yes. A pause. Then your call. Rostova exhaled slowly. Miller's whisper trembled. What do we do? She didn't answer. Not right away. She was studying the boy, how his shoulders moved, the angle of his arms, the way his eyes flicked toward the hostage platform. He's scared, she said finally. He's not controlling it, he's protecting someone who is. Miller frowned. Then who? Her eyes widened. Upstairs, left corner, movement. A figure emerged, the real handler, remote detonator in hand. Rostova moved 0.5 millimeter. Fired once. The round passed clean through the man's temple, no sound, no warning. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings. The boy flinched, startled. The radio slipped from his grasp, clattering harmlessly to the floor. Go, Rostova snapped. Davies and Chun broke cover, moving fast. They cleared the lower level, neutralized the remaining hostiles before any could react. Miller stayed with Rostova, covering high. When the last echo of gunfire faded, he lowered his rifle, breathing hard. The hostages were alive, shaken but breathing. Package secured, Davies called over comms. 3 civilians safe, no friendly casualties. Vale's voice came back, thick with relief. Copy that, exfil in 10. Hell of a job, Archangel. Rostova didn't respond. Her rifle was still aimed at the boy, who stood frozen, hands trembling, tears mixing with rain and dust. Gunny, Miller said quietly, he's just a kid. I know. She lowered her rifle. He stared at her for a long moment. Why didn't you shoot earlier? Her answer came slow. Because sometimes the right shot isn't the one you take. He looked down at the trembling child. The boy wasn't an enemy, just another casualty of proximity. Rostova crouched, meeting his frightened eyes. Her voice softened. You're done here, go home. He nodded once, eyes wide, and ran into the darkness. Miller exhaled shakily. That could have gone bad. It usually does, she said. That's why you don't rush the trigger. They exfiltrated at dawn. The Osprey's interior hummed with the dull vibration of engines. The hostages sat near the back, dazed but safe. Rostova sat across from Miller. He watched her in silence, trying to read the expression behind her calm. Finally he asked, did you ever miss? Her eyes flicked toward him, then back to the window where the desert blurred beneath them. Once, she said quietly, and I never forgot what it cost. She didn't elaborate. Didn't need to. The weight in her voice said enough. The aircraft shuddered slightly in turbulence. Miller tightened his grip on his rifle. Rostova closed her eyes, the faint hum of rotors washing over her like static memory. Another mission, another silence earned. Back on base, the sun was high and unforgiving. The world carried on, mechanics yelling over engines, cooks calling out names in the mess line, the distant crack of rifles at the range. Normalcy pretending to be real. Rostova walked across the compound alone. Davies watched her go, shaking his head slightly. She sees everything, he said quietly to Chun. Chun nodded. But the thing is, she replied, I think she feels it too. Miller stayed silent. He knew that was true. Every perfect shot she took left a mark, not on the enemy but on her. Later, as evening fell, he saw her again, sitting in the same place on the same ammo can, rifle across her lap. Cleaning it piece by piece, as if washing away another layer of the world. He didn't disturb her this time. He just watched from afar, learning the same lesson all over again. Some people fight wars. Others carry them. And she carried them all. That night, as the desert wind whispered through the base, Miller finally understood what she'd meant on the rooftop, in that breathless moment between heartbeats. The space between the shots wasn't empty. It was where everything truly lived. And in that space, Gunnery Sergeant Alina Rostova, Harrow, found something even rarer than victory. She found restraint. What happens when the ghosts finally answer back? The desert was still. So still it felt like the world had stopped breathing. 2 days had passed since the hostage rescue, but no one felt rested. The mission was technically a success, no losses, all objectives met, but Rostova hadn't smiled once. Not even the half-smile she gave when the work was done right. Miller noticed it first. She was quieter than usual, more distant. And when she cleaned her rifle that night, the rhythm was different, slower, distracted. He thought about saying something. He didn't. Some silences you don't break. At 400, a message came down the line. Not through official channels. Encrypted old code. Rostova received it while alone in the armory, the flickering light strobing across her face. She opened the transmission, eyes scanning the short text. Target resurfaced. Possible location, Wadi Heron, coordinates attached, authorization black. Black authorization. Untraceable. Off book. She stared at it for a long time, jaw tightening, the glow of the screen reflected in her pale eyes. Then she deleted the message, powered the terminal off, and sat there completely still. There was a weight to her silence, the kind that only came when a wound reopened. By sunrise, she'd already packed her kit. No orders, no announcement. Just quiet efficiency. Miller found her near the motor pool, tightening straps on her ruck. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Routine recon," she said. He frowned, alone. She didn't look at him. "It's easier that way." He knew better. "Bullshit," he said softly. "You're going after someone." Her hand stilled. Then she finally looked at him. "Someone I should have finished a long time ago." The words were calm, too calm. He stepped closer. "You don't need to do this alone, Gunny." Her expression softened just slightly, almost pity. "Yes, I do." She slung her rifle over her shoulder and walked away. She drove east for hours, the desert shifting from tan to red to bone white. The road eventually disappeared, replaced by sand and silence. The coordinates led her to the ruins of an old village, long abandoned, half swallowed by dunes. Crumbled wall, skeletal doorframes, echoes of lives erased. She stopped the vehicle, stepped out, and stood in the wind. The horizon shimmered like a mirage. For a moment she thought maybe it was all a lie, another ghost chasing her through old intel. Then she saw it, faint footprints fresh leading toward a collapsed well. She followed them slowly, rifle loose in her hands, every step deliberate. The voice came before the figure. Low, rough, familiar. "I wondered how long it would take you." Rostova froze. Then turned. A man stepped out from behind the ruined wall, bearded, sunburnt, carrying a rusted rifle. He was older now, slower, but his eyes still carried that same cruel sharpness. Mikhail Veronikov. Once her spotter. Once her brother in arms. Now a ghost she'd been chasing for 9 years. He smiled faintly. "Did you really think you could kill me with one bullet?" She didn't answer. She didn't raise her weapon either. "You should have finished it in Grozny," he said, "but you hesitated. You always did when it mattered." Her voice was steady. "And you didn't." He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "I learned you didn't." The wind picked up, carrying sand between them. They stood like statues carved from memory. Rostova's voice broke the silence. "You sold coordinates to insurgents. You killed your own spotter team." Mikhail's smile didn't fade. "They weren't my team anymore. They were liabilities. You know how that works." Her jaw tightened. "You betrayed your oath." He tilted his head. "And you did." She frowned slightly. "What are you talking about?" "You're still here, aren't you?" he said. "Still killing, still obeying ghosts in uniforms. You think you're different because your orders come with flags on them." She took a step forward. "I don't kill for orders. I kill to save lives." He laughed softly. "That's what they all say, until they start counting the bodies." The air between them felt charged. Not anger, not hatred, but something more fragile. "Why now?" she asked quietly. Mikhail shrugged. "I wanted to see if the legend was still real." His eyes narrowed. "They call you Hero now, fitting name. You dig graves well." She said nothing. He stepped closer, the rifle hanging lazily at his side. "You came to finish it, so finish it." She didn't move. "Do it," he said, louder now. "Take your perfect shot, be the ghost they whisper about." Her hands didn't shake, but her eyes, they softened. "No," she said finally. He blinked. "No. You want me to be the monster you became. I won't." Mikkel's expression flickered confusion, then anger. "You don't get to choose what you are." "Neither do you," she said. For a heartbeat, they just stared at each other, two mirrors reflecting the same wound. Then his rifle twitched. Hers didn't. One shot. Clean. Final. He dropped without sound. The echo lingered across the dunes. Rostova stood still, breathing slow, her rifle lowering inch by inch. The wind swallowed everything else. She sat beside the body for a long time. Not mourning. Not proud. Just still. The desert sun climbed higher, the heat shimmering around her. Her voice was a whisper meant only for the dead. "You were right about one thing. We both stopped being soldiers a long time ago." She looked down at her rifle, then out at the horizon. It was endless. Empty. And yet somehow full of everything she'd been running from. She reached into her pocket and pulled out something small, a tarnished brass coin, engraved with two letters, RV. She placed it beside him. A reminder. A closure. A debt repaid. Then she stood and walked back toward the vehicle. Hours later, the radio crackled. Miller's voice, faint but steady. "Gunny, are you still out there?" She hesitated before answering. "Copy. Intel says you went off-grid. I figured that wasn't by accident." "It was." A pause. Then quietly, "You found him, didn't you?" She didn't answer directly. "I found what was left." He exhaled softly. "Are you coming back?" She looked out at the vast desert, the horizon trembling in heat. "I haven't decided yet." "Why not?" "Because I'm not sure what's left of me to bring back." Miller's reply was soft. "You once said the silence after the shot is the loudest sound in the world." She smiled faintly, and maybe it's time to stop listening to it. She didn't reply. Not for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost human again. "I'll think about it." "Copy that," he said. "We'll keep the lights on." The transmission ended. Rostova sat in the silence for a moment, then started the engine. The vehicle rumbled to life, sand swirling in the wake. She drove west toward the base, toward whatever waited there. But her mind wasn't on the mission anymore. It was on what she'd just done. What she'd become. Not the legend. Not Harrow. Just Elena Rostova, a woman who'd spent too long in the crosshairs of her own memory. Back at base, the sun was setting. Miller stood by the gate, scanning the horizon. He didn't know what he expected, maybe a convoy, maybe a call. Then through the haze, a shape appeared. A vehicle. Her vehicle. When it stopped, she climbed out slowly. Her uniform was caked with dust, her face streaked with sweat, eyes hollow but alive. He didn't ask what happened. She didn't explain. They just stood there for a while, the silence between them heavier than words. Finally, Miller said softly, "Welcome home, Gunny." Rostova gave a faint, tired smile. "Home," she repeated, almost to herself. Then she looked past him, toward the fading light over the desert. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Maybe one day I'll believe that." That night in her quarters, she cleaned her rifle again, not out of necessity but out of ritual. Each piece laid out neatly, wiped down, reassembled. But when she reached for the final bolt, her hand stopped. She looked at her reflection in the oiled steel. For the first time in years, she didn't see Harrow. She saw Elena. And she didn't look afraid. Just tired. She whispered to the empty room, "You can stop running now." Outside, the desert wind carried faint thunder. Or maybe it was just memory, echoing across the years. Either way, she didn't flinch. Not this time. Because sometimes, redemption doesn't arrive with applause. It arrives quietly, in the stillness after the storm, in the decision not to pull the trigger again. And as the night deepened around her, Gunnery Sergeant Elena Rostova finally allowed herself to close her eyes. Not in retreat, but in release. How does a ghost leave the battlefield? Not with medals, not with speeches, but with silence and the quiet hope that someone else won't have to learn the same lessons the hard way. 3 months passed. The war didn't end, but the rhythm of violence changed. It always did. The base still smelled of oil and dust. Engines still roared before dawn. And the wind still carried whispers through the razor wire. But something in the air felt different. People spoke her name now, not in fear, not in disbelief, but with the slow respect reserved for those who'd earned it the hard way. Gunnery Sergeant Elena Rostova had returned from the desert a little slower, a little quieter. Her walk was the same, her posture still perfect. But her eyes, they weren't searching anymore. They had found something, peace maybe, or at least a version of it that soldiers are allowed. The new recruits arrived midweek. Fresh faces, too young to understand the weight of the world they just stepped into. The kind who still smiled when they saw aircraft take off, who still took photos beside armored vehicles like it meant something. Miller was with them now, newly promoted, sleeves rolled, clipboard in hand. He'd taken over the small arms training detail. Rostova watched from a distance as he corrected a stance, adjusted a scope, and spoke with the quiet authority of someone who'd seen the desert blink first. She smiled. It wasn't pride exactly. It was recognition. He caught her watching and gave a small nod, one soldier to another. No words needed. Later in the armory, he found her cleaning a rifle that wasn't hers. One of the recruits had jammed it during drills. "Gunny," he said softly, "you know you don't have to do that anymore." She looked up. "If I don't, who will?" He laughed lightly. "The new kids, that's who." She gave him a look that made him straighten a little. Then softly, "That's exactly why I do it." He didn't argue. After a moment, he sat across from her. There was a comfortable silence between them, the kind earned through shared battles and wordless understanding. Finally, he asked, "You ever think about leaving, getting out for good?" She set the rifle down. Her fingers lingered on the steel. "Every day," she said. "And every day I remember that leaving isn't the same as healing." He frowned slightly. "You don't think you've done enough?" Her voice softened. "No one ever does enough, Miller. That's the curse of surviving." He looked down at the weapon between them. "It's strange," he said. "When I first met you, I thought war made people hard." She tilted her head. "And now? Now I think it just shows who they already were." She gave a faint smile. "You're learning." That night, a storm rolled over the desert, thunder echoing like distant artillery. Most of the base took shelter, but Rostova sat outside beneath the awning, watching lightning dance across the sky. Rain turned the sand into streaks of silver. She closed her eyes and let the sound fill her. When she opened them, she wasn't thinking about Miko, or the missions, or the shots she took. She was thinking about all the people who hadn't come back. She whispered their names under her breath, one by one. A litany. A roll call for ghosts. Then she stood, saluted the empty horizon, and went back inside. Weeks later, the call came down from command. Rostova was being reassigned. Not to combat, to Quantico. Instructor role. Advanced marksmanship and tactical psychology. It was a quiet acknowledgement, the military's way of saying, "You've given enough. Now teach them how not to die." When she told Miller, he didn't say much. just nodded, jaw tight. He already knew what it meant. "Will you miss it?" he asked. She shrugged slightly. "I'll miss the silence between shots." Then, after a pause, "But maybe it's time to teach someone else what it means." Her last day on base was quiet. No ceremony, no farewell party. Just a handshake from Vale, a salute from Davies, and a few quiet words from Chun. "Take care of yourself, Gunny." She smiled faintly. "I'll try." Then she walked to the airstrip with nothing but her pack and her rifle case. The Osprey waited, engines idling, rear ramp down. Before she climbed aboard, Miller caught up. He handed her a small box. "What's this?" she asked. He smiled. "Something the guys put together." She opened it. Inside was a coin, plain brass, engraved with the words, "See what others don't." She turned it over. On the back a single word, Harrow. Her eyes softened. She closed the lid. "Thank you," she said quietly. He hesitated, then asked the question he'd carried for months. "Gunny, was it worth it, all of it?" She looked past him, toward the horizon, the desert stretching endlessly beneath the pale blue sky. Her answer came like wind through wire. "It has to be, otherwise all the noise was for nothing." Hours later, the aircraft lifted off. The base shrank below, becoming small, almost unreal. Miller stood there, watching until it vanished into the clouds. He didn't realize it, but she was watching too from the small circular window, eyes unfocused, mind half here, half gone. She wasn't thinking about war. She was thinking about the people she'd taught, the lives she'd saved, the ghosts she'd made peace with, and the lessons she'd leave behind. At Quantico, her name carried ahead of her. The new recruits whispered it like myth. But when she entered the classroom for the first time, she wasn't the legend they expected. No medals, no stories. Just calm eyes and a voice that carried quiet authority. She began her first lecture with a question. "Why do you think people miss?" The room was silent. A young recruit finally answered, "Because they're afraid." Rostova nodded slowly. "That's part of it, but it's deeper." She set a rifle on the table, hands gentle. "People miss because they aim to kill, not to understand. The best marksmen aren't hunters, they're listeners." She looked around the room. You listen to the wind, the terrain, the silence. You listen to what's not there, and only when you've heard it all do you act. She paused. "And sometimes you don't." The recruit sat motionless. Something in her tone made the air heavy. Then she smiled softly, small, human, real. "Now," she said, "let's get to work." That night, alone in her quarters, she unpacked the brass coin Miller had given her. She set it beside the rifle case, beside a small photo of her old team. Then she took out a notebook, not for orders but for memory. The first line she wrote was simple. "The silence isn't punishment, it's peace." She closed it, leaned back and exhaled. For the first time in decades, she didn't feel like she was waiting for something. She was exactly where she needed to be. Outside, the Virginia night hummed softly, crickets, wind, and the low rhythm of a world still turning. Somewhere in another part of the world, someone else was watching a horizon, rifle in hand, listening to the silence. Maybe one of her students. Maybe someone she'd never meet. It didn't matter. The work was continuing. And that was enough. Voiceover closes with slow, cinematic tone. She was never the loudest in the room. Never the one telling her story. But when others spoke of courage, they spoke her name even if they didn't know why. Because courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to move through it, quietly, deliberately, without needing the world to notice. And dignity. Dignity doesn't shout. It doesn't seek applause. It doesn't demand to be seen. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.